Welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm Ajahn Cunda with the Hermitage Dhamma, and it's Tuesday night, so we'll be checking in with people, seeing if there are any questions you have. This will be our last, possibly our last Hermitage Dhamma Tuesday evening, 6:30 p.m. Tuesday evening Q&A that's going to be held here, and we will be moving to the Yoga Samadhi studio next Tuesday on May 11th. We'll start at the same time, and again, the questions come up whether it will be on YouTube, and it will be on YouTube if all goes according to plan. And so then we will have some in-person gathering. I think the way that'll go is we'll have already sat an hour before. That won't be live streamed because that's just a silent sitting with a bell to start, bell to end, and no frills. And then that ends at 6:15. So then at 6:30, we'll start the live stream there, and we'll do another half-hour sit, followed by short reflection. And then if there's any questions people have, those can be posted on the chat as we're doing now. And also there might be some questions from the people who are in person. I think the number is about 20 people we can have in total. Might be a little bit more than that, but not too much more. So we'll see how it goes. And I'm looking forward to just trying a new experience and making it available to people in person. So that'll be quite a nice experience. I think several of the people who tune in are going to be there. So yeah, it would be nice to try to continue that. And I say that we're planning on doing that sort of into the indefinite future on Tuesdays. But as most of you know, the pandemic, how the kind of guidelines go, and there's sort of phase 2 and 3 and stepping back and going forward. We'll just see how it goes. But the plan is for me to do that for the next 6-7 weeks, and then Lumpur and Ajahn Cunda will take over the Tuesday evenings. Otherwise, it's been a lovely day here in White Salmon, and not too much to report. Just practice and living the monastic life. Quite nice. And it's sometimes helpful to reflect on the days. Can sometimes seem like they're very similar to each other. There's not a lot of changes, but I really appreciate the story of the ads, the kind of wearing down of the ads, which is like, just imagine like any kind of tool that you would use, like a hammer. And the Buddha talks about how you can own this tool, have this tool as your personal tool for a long period of time, and use it every day, but you don't quite notice each day that the handle is being worn down over and over again. But it's such a subtle change that you don't see it until you've used this ads or any kind of tool you can think of for many years, and then the change is there. So it's similar with our practice, that the days can seem very similar for us, and we're not always aware of subtle changes in ourselves. But it's good to have faith that things are changing, or we can see that our understanding around the Buddhist teachings are changing. We can see maybe we're taking things a little less seriously. We're able to have a slightly better sense of humor around certain things, or we can take certain things slowly. And that, as I was saying, that personal kind of drops out, that sense of self that we hold so strongly to can and begin to drop away, and we see it over time, but it's very hard to see day to day. And in fact, it's not necessarily linear as well. For many of us, we don't just progress on a path, you know, that's just up and up and getting better and better. You know, we can have peaks and valleys, and that's very normal when we're watching the mind. And especially as I understand, a little bit I understand about karma and the results of karma, our actions and the results of our actions, you know, we can't necessarily guarantee that the things that we've done in our past, whether it's from past lives or our current life, are going to particularly catch up with us at a certain point, and then we can have that valley, you know, that kind of difficult experience. And we might not be prepared for that if things are going well in our life, and think, why is this happening to me? Why am I not doing well? Things were looking so great the last few weeks or months or even years. And then we take a downturn, and sometimes it's, of course, evident in just the facts of our lives. You know, we lose someone who's close to us, or there's just a big life change that's quite difficult to deal with, or economically a challenge, or illness, or separated from people through like we're having now with a pandemic, or all kinds of things. Our lifestyles are changed, and so we can kind of see that influences us. But the main point is to actually look at these valleys or difficulties and see like how we're actually dealing with them, not whether we're just having pleasant experiences or blazing insights, but the day-to-day aspects of how we deal with the difficulties in our lives is really what can allow us to see how our Dharma practice has progressed, and give us a lot of confidence in what it is we're doing, if we are going in the right direction and we are putting an effort into our practice. We do see that tendency for there to have been change in the way that we react to people or react to ourselves. But it can take a long period of time, and it does, you know, it's just not evident day to day what's actually necessarily occurring for us. So I haven't seen any questions yet, but if you have any, please let me know. I think one of the interesting aspects about our lives as practitioners is that we need to often figure out for ourselves how we can kind of keep our minds towards the Dhamma. I mean, this is what mindfulness really is. It's remembering sort of skillful things that we can bring to our mind. And throughout the day, this just kind of often goes up and down, and it's not so easy for all of us, as I think most of us can say, to always keep that skillful sense of intention in our mind, to try to see clearly through how we're causing ourselves stress and difficulty. And so it's just kind of softly reminding ourselves not to be too harsh, but just to keep going, to keep trying out what it is that we're understanding, not to fall into our usual patterns that are easy to slip into. So that's very important to just keep reminding ourselves. That's the thing, is uplifting our minds and bringing ourselves to what we know is more skillful for whatever it is that we're doing. So these are important reminders. We can just kind of say, oh yeah, like what's the best thing for me to be doing right now? And we just kind of figure it out, from our past, from what's going on currently. Maybe it's not the right time for me to say this to my friend or partner or whatever. And we try to be more aware of like what's the best place, what's the best space, what's the best time for me, how quickly do I need to react, can I pause? All of these things remind us to just kind of keep our ROI on the path. So there's a question here. I don't think I see another one from JML. Visualization is a powerful technique for messing with one's head. Does it have a role in Buddhist practice? Yes, absolutely. Although I wouldn't, I think using the term messing with one's head, if I'm interpreting that in more of a positive way, encouraging positive mental states, let's say, then yeah, visualization is very much a part of Buddhist practice. Some of the things that come up around that are in the sort of Theravada tradition is around our bodies, how we visualize our bodies. This can be anything from visualizing the parts in our bodies. It can be visualizing even corpses falling apart. That certainly messes with people's heads, as was asked. So that quality of trying to kind of see how, for example, our bodies are made of parts. There's also elements contemplation. But visualizing elements tends to be a little bit more difficult. So there's a felt sense that we often get with like wind or how I feel heat in our bodies, or the solidity, the earth element. So I find personally that's not as easy to use a visualization around. It's more of it feels right, or it to think about the elements, what it is like that we're kind of made up of. So so there's earth, wind, fire, and what's the fourth one? I can't remember right now. Earth, wind, fire, and there's this one of the sixth ones is space. And I'm just blanking. I'm sorry. This happens sometimes, but it's good not to take it personally. So anyway, we can visualize these things, and water. Sorry, water was the fourth. So just what's the sense of fluidity, for example, with water in our bodies? What is the sense of like wind or air? So there's a feeling of that. So I don't find that helpful to visualize, but I do find it very helpful to think about like fluidity in the body, or like solidity. How do I feel solidity? Or air, wind. Wind is kind of more like movement, that sense of movement, and heat or fire is more, it's just a sense we have of warmth or coolness within the body. But then there's also like metta. Some people will use visualizations with metta, and right, everybody keeps saying water. That's very good, but I got that one on my own. So anyway, just so you know, I'm not that incompetent. So with something like metta, we might find it useful to imagine beings or people. We might find it helpful to have a sense of like visualizing ourselves, when we're saying positive things, may I be happy, may I be well. We're actually imagining a person or imagining a group of people or beings or animals, something like that. So these are all kind of different visualizations. In the Tibetan tradition, there's, visualizing kind of sort of celestial palaces and all kinds of interesting things that bring the mind to a sense of collectedness or concentration. So yeah, visualization can play a larger role in meditation techniques, and I find it helpful to use sometimes. and I think I touched on those other ones just before I finished that, about corpse contemplation, and that's definitely a visualization practice, imagining one's own death and the body decomposing until there's really nothing left. The bones are scattered, and then eventually they're just dust. Or imagining specifically the parts in our body, so we get more associated with that being our body rather than how we're often attracted to how we look or how others look. And we're attracted to parts that we sort of imagine are attractive, like skin or hair color, or hair, or eyes, or things that we see, but then we don't kind of actually bring up what they are. How would we feel if there was like a pile of hair sitting on a plate in front of us, or we're eating and we're pulling out hair from our mouth. This is kind of gross, but that can be the same hair that we're actually quite attracted to. Or somebody's eyes. Like, oh, that person's eyes are so beautiful. But if they were kind of out in front of us, pulled out of the socket, and there's blood and fluid, and it's just not very attractive. Or all the skin was pulled off. So it just kind of gives us more of a sense of like, oh, right, that tendency I have towards desire or lust can be quite diminished when we make those kind of visualizations. So it's a balancing factor or a balancing force using those kinds of visualizations. Visualizing the Buddha, people will use that sometimes. So yeah, all kinds of ways. Dave asks, I like to think I maintain no ill will toward even the most challenging familiars and strangers, but is there a good way to test myself with a reality check? Well, I think it's always possible to challenge that, just to watch your own mind. So it's I think the beginning, Dave, your question was, I like to think I maintain, and so that's of course a bit different than what you're watching or experience. So the only way to know, I would say, or challenge that, is to just try to add more awareness to your experience, to see like, well, really, is there any ill will? One of the ways is when you are visualizing a familiar or a stranger, then you can kind of just question, is there any aversion there? You might think of like maybe them doing something that would be unskillful or harmful, and do you feel aversion towards them? So that would still be a sense of ill will that might be there. I don't know, though, if there is a reason to challenge that as much as to just continue to practice it and see where it comes up. My question would just be, do you ever feel angry towards others? I mean, is there ever a time that somebody gets you upset? And if you answer no, well, great. In terms of the simile of the saw, the Buddha talks about that even if beings were cutting your limbs, cutting you from limb to limb, so like cutting off your arm, for you to maintain a moment of ill will would mean that you're not actually practicing the Buddha's teachings. That's a very high bar, and so that would be a test, but I don't suggest that you would ask somebody to cut off your limbs, so please don't do that. But just looking into how people treat you and whether you have aversion arising. And once you've seen that, then you can say, oh, okay, there might be something still there if I get upset or angry with somebody or frustrated. That's the true test. From Brandon, I struggle to find motivation to meditate. I've never heard that before. That's not true. So that's, I think, everybody's problem, Brandon. So yes, welcome to being human. There are some people who I think have practiced well enough, or they somehow were sort of born into being lucky, and they don't have this problem. But I've rarely met anyone who just is consistently able to sit down and never avoids or doesn't see that. But I'm sure there are people that just can, they have no avoiding of that. They just kind of sit all the time and have no problem with it, or there's never ever any kind of distraction. But I just don't find there's many people like that. So I spend more time listening to Dhamma and applying what I learn, but for some reason I'm not drawn to meditate. Any suggestions on how to change? Yes. This is as I was just talking about, this is a thing that many meditators or people who are interested in meditation struggle with. And one of the main struggles is that meditation, it isn't always immediately pleasant. It's not like eating a candy bar or watching some, interesting TV show or whatever. It's just not, it doesn't have a lot of pizzazz. And often we're dealing with monotony and or difficult emotions that come up. And so it's not an easy thing to do. Again, there might be some people who find like meditation very easy and no problem, and they don't have any difficulty with approaching it. But I think the tendency is that our minds, we're sort of born into this sensual realm, and our minds move towards sensuality very easily, or we move towards a sense of I and me and mine, a sense of becoming, and or trying to kind of get away from, which is often another reason how people will avoid meditation, is through sort of annihilation, kind of like, just get me out of here. I don't want to do this. I don't want to look at my mind. So this can be a problem for lay practitioners. It can be a problem for monks and nuns. In fact, as the years go on, my sense is that it becomes more of a problem. So the longer people are meditators, it has the potential to fall away later on, because there's sort of the beginner's mind, the enthusiasm that comes with that. That's often an occurrence, and people can get quite fired up about sitting with the mind and that challenge. But then as I was mentioning earlier on when I started the talk, as things kind of have more subtle changes, or we're not able to see it, or there's droughts, long periods of nothing really happening, people can lose their momentum. So I think that one is just acknowledging that it's not always easy to motivate ourselves. And the opposite of acknowledging is I would say, like, it's not acknowledging. That can be one opposite, but the other is just to criticize ourselves and think that we're not actually doing, we're not worthy, we're not kind of really together people, we're incompetent. Like, how can I forget one of the four elements? I'm such an incompetent monk. This kind of stuff can come up, and so we blame ourselves, and then that creates more of a disassociation or with meditation, or an association with the unpleasant when it comes to meditating, because we just kind of are negative. We let the tyrant out, and we think, oh, I'm not a good meditator. So one of the first things and very important things is to really be careful of that, careful of the negativity we form around meditating. So I think you said quite simply that you're not drawn to meditate, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of people aren't drawn to meditate, so we need to figure out a way to motivate ourselves. And I think one of those motivations is around pleasure. And I've touched on this before, how meditation, it's like we need to be able to figure out pleasure. Even the Buddha said that. This wasn't like a task that we do, that we're just sort of torturing ourselves. That's the exact opposite of what he suggested. And in fact, that's what he was doing when he decided, there's a lot of pleasure that can be associated with meditation, and I remember experiencing that pleasure even when I was a very young child, like he was 3 or 4 years old or something, and he just fell into a very concentrated state when he was quite young, and he also subsequently experienced those states later. But the difference is that this, I believe, the difference was that the states that he first arrived at, this very concentrated or collected state of mind that he had when he was a young child, and I believe we could more or less say it was like entering the jhanas. There was no forcing that; he slipped into it. Whereas later in life, you have a sense that he was really pushing himself. He was pushing himself to be like the best, and then this was in meditation. So that's possibly why he remembers, when he talks about this pleasantness, he remembers when he was a child rather than remembering all of the quite incredible states he was experiencing when he was a young adult, or in his, sorry, he was in his later 20s. And so that's one of those things that that he says is pleasure. You know, we want to associate our meditative experience with pleasure, that it's a pleasant thing. We want to enjoy it, and I think it's important to figure that out, to try to ask yourself, like, if you're not motivated, is there something around the fact that it's kind of it's not pleasant? There's nothing enjoyable about it, and it's not like just the pleasantness of peace that I think one can derive from meditation, but it's also the pleasantness of doing something that you know is good for you and is helpful for you. And one needs to do it in order to see that. But that is, it's a very important part. We're essentially building confidence. That's what another word for faith, as I've said, is sattva, is confidence. And so we're kind of investigating and seeing for ourselves, right, the Buddha's teachings were correct. We're verifying it in our own experience. And so that feels good. It feels really good when we're doing that. Or when you associate not wanting to meditate and you do it anyway, that also brings a lot of sort of confidence, and it feels good. And again, it's associating that pleasantness. This doesn't mean that meditation is going to be pleasant either all the time or some of the time or part of the time. It's just it's hard to figure it out, and it takes a long time. But there is a time, there is a possibility that eventually one can have quite an influence over one's meditative practice, to the point where there is a skill developed in creating peace and sukha, happiness and joy and piti, and these qualities that the Buddha talks about with, for example, the first jhana, and how we kind of also orient our minds in terms of how we're focusing our minds in this on the subject of whatever we're focusing on, the breath. We're sort of elevating that quality of our what we're looking at, what we're examining, what we're exploring, and we're kind of touching it and kind of feeling it with our minds. And so these qualities can come up. This is another way of talking about vitakka vichara, but we can also talk about it as thought, particularly thinking about what it is we're focusing on. But there's lots of interpretations about what that means. So these qualities we can actually bring up. It's not like we just have to fall into them, like one falls into the first jhana, for example. We can see, like, is there piti that arises? Is there rapture, very pleasant experiences, or we feel happy? The mind is more collected, it's more concentrated, there's a sense of peace. And so those qualities we can kind of bring up for ourselves, and we can learn those to do that as a skill. So eventually, after long periods of time with meditation, that's possible. So I think in answering your question, I'm trying to encourage you to try it out, even if you're not drawn to it. Sort of one of the encouragements we have is often when you want to meditate, meditate. When you don't want to meditate, meditate. So you don't have to necessarily be drawn to meditation to try it. And that's, that's kind of, it's harder because then if, it's easier probably for people who are drawn to it. Obviously they feel more motivation around it. But I would say that part of that being drawn to it is doing it and say, oh yeah, this is actually feels great, or this is something interesting that I'm doing. So if you're saying you enjoy listening to Dhamma, applying that to what you learn, then try that in meditation for just 5 minutes. Sit for 5 minutes and then see, okay, like I've learned these things that I'm listening to from other teachers or things I've read from the Buddha, and how can I apply that to what my experience is in the mind when I'm meditating? And so that can be a motivating factor to kind of not just how you are engaging with what we'd say is informal practice, which is sort of life off the mat, or not doing, not talking about really walking meditation or sitting meditation, or lying down meditation, or standing meditation, but you're watching your life as you're going along. You're applying Dhamma, so that's very good. But I think the formal aspect is very important, and it can have a real steadiness that one can understand when one's looking very closely at the mind in that calm state. I personally find that sort of informal practice, so just like trying to watch the mind throughout the day and be aware of the teachings as you're talking about, is helpful, but it's kind of like, I think it sort of can be like running a battery on low if one doesn't have a lot of experience with the formal side of meditation. For me, the formal side of meditation is often a recharge. It sort of allows the mind to have a deeper sense of the Dhamma and what I'm experiencing. There's just a quality of being less kind of spun out by the world or by whatever it is we're engaging in. I certainly don't feel that when I'm engaging, for example, in an hour of sitting meditation, I tend to feel more spun out. I don't find that than when I'm like just doing day-to-day activities. It can be that mental states can feel quite difficult when I'm meditating, for example, but for the most part, it's just a more calming and experience, and it's much easier to see the problems that are occurring in the mind. Whereas the day-to-day activities, it's just harder. It's a lot harder to maintain that focus because there's switching of attention. There's having to deal with different people, and whatever you're doing, there's just a lot going on. So that formal side really allows us to be in a calmer space, and allows us to see things a lot more clearly. At least that's my experience. And again, I think that one just tries it out, and you don't have to do an hour. Just try 5-minute meditations. I would say, maybe do some homework. Do like a 5-minute sit once a day for the next week or the next few days, if you tune in on Friday morning, and just see how that goes. See how that feels. What's that experience like? And also, you'd want to try. To familiarize yourself with it, because it doesn't. When people first try meditating, it's like, oh, this isn't working, and just don't give up. That's an important factor, is not giving up and trying to stay with it. I think that just getting ourselves to sit down is often a great thing to do. And one of the things that helps with that is, just to get ourselves on, like, or whatever it is, however people are, whatever posture you're taking, is just kind of getting yourself to do it. and then kind of things will follow through on that, even if it's just for a minute. So it's establishing a habit. I find one of the most beneficial ways of doing that is having a time. So you know this is a time when you're not going to have any other interruptions. You set things aside. It's not like right in the middle of the day where something could just, you know, bowl over that intention or stop that from happening because there's different things. But maybe you do it earlier in the morning, before there are other distractions, or late in the evening, whatever it is. You find some time that you can set aside, and that's sort of the first step, I think, is like creating a repeating process over and over. So I recommend that for everyone, to have times that we meditate, because we're much more likely to do that. We're much more likely to engage in that formal practice if we are developing habits around it, you know, good habits, not sort of avoiding habits. And I think most people are aware of that. They're aware of that helpfulness that comes from of that habit. And I can't say enough about how joyful it is to every day engage in the same thing, and there is a lot of confidence that arises in that, even if the meditation's terrible. And what is a bad meditation? It's another good question to ask, because it's not. We often think meditations that are difficult are terrible, but they're not. They're very it's not we can't necessarily look at like pleasantness or unpleasantness or difficulty or our distractions. You know, we might be very distracted in meditation and then we want to blame ourselves, but it's not. Who knows? Maybe there was a lot of effort that was made to just keep ourselves to know that we're actually distracted throughout our sit, and we often forget that if one finishes a sit and says, "Oh, I didn't pay attention to what I was focusing on the whole time. I didn't, you know, like if I'm looking at the breath, you might think, oh, I didn't even follow that once. I was just distracted. It was just thought after thought. And I kept coming back, but it just never settled on the breath." And he said, well, but you did keep coming back. Maybe that happened hundreds of times. So to be aware of thinking is actually doesn't make a sit a failure, or a meditation experience a failure. I think just the quality of actually sitting down and trying it out is what's important. But there's another element I'd like to say around that, which is very important when we do sit, is that sometimes sort of the next step to having just developed that habit of sitting is to keep with the intention of what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. Because sometimes I remember someone telling me that when he meditates, he comes up with some of the, you know, greatest thoughts he has around his job or whatever it is, or what's going on in his life, and spends a lot of time thinking. And there was something kind of positive in what he was saying, is that there was a allowing for kind of a quiet time with oneself. But we can get into experiences of I was just thinking, well, that's what meditation is. I just sit down, and then we lose our intention to understand the Dhamma and to watch our minds, and we just think of it as like, well, I'm sitting, that's good enough. So that's just the start, and I want to recommend it as a start, our potential to sit. You know, to physically sit down or stand up or lie down, whatever posture you're taking, walking. But it's important not to get too fooled by our mind sort of slipping away from our intention of what it is we're doing when we're doing that, which is to be with the mind, to be aware of the mind, to try to see how we're being fooled by our intentions, or, you know, how the dukkha is unfolding and how we cannot suffer. One of the main skills we're learning in meditation is how not to suffer. And so we can kind of forget that and create a lot of suffering for ourselves while we're meditating. I mean, we can go into directions of sort of like a rant if we're having a problem with a particular person and why we're right and they're wrong, and not really identify like, oh, wait a minute, like I'm actually hurt here. There's a painful experience coming up with someone else, And that's what's going on here. And I'm focusing it on a more worldly level of thinking about the person and or defending myself or whatever it might be, rather than there's some pain, and we don't have to. We can experience that difficulty, that hurt, but it's our reactions to it that often are causing the problem. So unskillful reactions, for example, that I was just talking about. So those are just some thoughts about getting oneself to meditate. I also find that one other thing is just visualizing yourself. We were talking about visualizations, just kind of thinking like, okay, I'm going to meditate now. Sometimes I'll do that if I'm practicing yoga. I just kind of think, okay, I'm entering my kuti right now. I'm going to go do some yoga, or I'll just think about it, and I'll imagine myself doing it, and that helps. So that can help with meditation as well. Just thinking, okay, I'll be, in a moment I'll be sitting, and then it kind of it breaks through the distraction, or the ways that my mind is sort of trying to pull away from that. I think there's lots of tricks. If anybody else has some, they can maybe let others know. So yeah, there was a comment about the people who would benefit the most from meditation find it the hardest to do. Possibly there's a correlation with that. I'm not sure. So Alexander asks, what do you think about music meditation, like playing a bamboo flute and meditating at the same time? Well, I could kind of put on my Theravada monk statement and with that, or think of that and say, oh, well, music isn't meditation. But yeah, I think that for some people that's a possibility. Is one can listen to music and find it a pleasant meditative experience, or playing music. That can be very calming for people. Certainly if somebody was to say, what's more skillful, for me to play a bamboo or to play a video game, I would say I'd probably stick with that bamboo. I mean, sorry, the bamboo flute is what was said. So, yeah, stick with playing the flute rather than something like that. But in the end, I think that playing musical instruments is a sensual experience. And it does tend to draw us into that sensuality of pleasantness around hearing. And I think one can be very drawn to that and not see the sort of emotional pull and attachment that we have towards music. And so I think it's important to just be able to watch the mind and see how the mind is actually having that kind of pull. And for me, that's more of around craving and desire that's coming up. So when I played music, I found that helpful, much more helpful than listening in terms of skillfulness around the mind. Listening just tended to, I could be put into a good mood by it, but it's more of I just find that listening to music tends to pull me away from the potential of seeing how I can influence my own mind, rather than allowing some sort of melody to influence it or bring me up or down or whatever it might be. Playing music, I think, is a little bit different. My experience with playing the guitar, for example, was that it was a skill that I enjoyed learning, and I felt quite good about that when I was learning the guitar. But in terms of how much music can, like the learning around music can bring one to a sense of understanding desire, I would say that's probably harder, a little bit more difficult. And so I guess the question would be like, are you able to contemplate the Four Noble Truths when playing the flute? That there is suffering or discontent, or stress that one experiences, and that desire is is the reason for that. And seeing that when one removes desire, unwholesome desire, then that allows for the ending of that stress or the ending of that suffering or discontent. If that's what one's doing when one's playing music, then okay. I would say that's quite meditative, but I doubt that a lot of people are kind of doing that when they're playing an instrument. Surely there is a sense that I noticed of like the desire to be good, or almost a self-competitiveness, and trying to let go of that was helpful. Just allow it to be an enjoyable experience. But there's not a lot that I, as a Theravada monk, would probably advocate with music or playing music, because that's just not our realm in terms of what we encourage. Because there's, I think one could spend a lot of time in that, but we only have so much time to really understand our minds before we die, and we don't know how much time we have. So I think each person has to look skillfully into their own lives and see how much doing something like that, learning a skill like playing music, is helpful. And I don't want to say that it's not, because I think it's better than doing other things. But I don't know if it would lead to sort of the same path that the Buddha is pointing to in terms of like meditation and the formal side of meditation. So I think we've come to an end to the session. So I'd like to end with a couple of minutes of meditation for anybody who'd like to sit right now. Brandon, if you're still here, you can try it out. And I'll end with a bell. I just would like to suggest that people try to experience their own body. So just, how do you feel? How do you know that you're in a body? It's hard for us to do that, so we want to drop out of our heads, and we can feel our bodies sitting or standing. What is the feeling of that? Or the movement of our breath? And try that out. thank you everyone for joining. And if you are here next week and not at the in-person event, here meaning on the YouTube channel, then we'll see you then. And please feel free to post any questions you have after the latter portion. I think will be around 7:15 or so. And we should have some Q&A probably around that point. So that'll be 6:30 p.m. start on next Tuesday. And then we'll continue with our regular Friday mornings at 7 a.m. on YouTube. So be well and have a good few days.